The Galactic Council chambers floated in the darkness between stars. The massive structure looked like a crystal mountain turned inside out, its walls glowing with soft blue light. Inside, beings from across the galaxy gathered around a circular table that stretched for miles. Some had bodies made of metal and circuits. Others were clouds of gas that sparkled with their own inner fire. A few looked almost like humans, but with too many arms or eyes that glowed like tiny suns. At the center of the great table sat the oldest members of the council. These ancient beings had lived for millions of years. They had seen stars born and die. They had watched entire species rise from nothing and fall to dust. Nothing surprised them anymore. Nothing except the war that had raged for over 1,000,000 years without end. The war was between two peoples who hated each other more than anything else in the universe. On one side were the Zephyrians. They had no solid bodies. Instead, they were made of pure energy and thought. They moved like dancing lightning through space, their minds connected in ways other beings could barely understand. They saw the universe as patterns of energy that could be shaped by will alone. On the other side were the Karathi. They were the opposite of everything the Zephyrians believed. Their bodies were made of living crystal and metal. They thought as one great mind, billions of individuals connected like cells in a single body. They built massive ships that looked like floating cities. To them, the universe was solid and real, something to be touched and built upon. The two peoples had been fighting for so long that no one remembered how it started. Some said the Zephyrians had tried to force the Karathi to give up their solid forms. Others claimed the Karathi had attacked first, trying to trap the energy beings in crystal prisons. The truth was lost in 1,000,000 years of blood and hate. The war had destroyed everything in its path. Entire solar systems had been turned to ash. Beautiful worlds that had taken billions of years to grow life were now empty rocks drifting in space. Other species had tried to stop the fighting. They had offered to mediate. They had threatened both sides. They had even tried to force peace with their own armies. Nothing worked. The ancient council members had given up trying decades ago. They simply worked around the war zones now, marking off huge sections of the galaxy as too dangerous for anyone to enter. Trade routes bent around the fighting like water flowing around a stone. It was just a fact of life like gravity or the speed of light. The Zephyrians have destroyed another Karathi mining world, announced Executor Thane, a being whose body looked like liquid mercury poured into the shape of a tree. His voice echoed through the chamber with the weight of centuries. 3 billion Karathi died in the attack. Around the table, other council members made sounds of sadness or anger, but it was the tired kind of sadness that comes from hearing the same bad news over and over again. They had heard reports like this thousands of times before. The Karathi response will be swift, said High Mother Vex, whose spider-like body was covered in patterns that shifted and changed as she spoke. They will target a Zephyrian energy garden. The cycle continues, as it always has, Thane replied. As it always will. This was how council meetings about the war always went. Someone would report the latest destruction. Others would predict what would happen next. Then they would move on to other business. The war between the Zephyrians and Karathi had become like the weather, something to be endured rather than changed. But today was different. Today a new voice spoke up from the far end of the table. What if it doesn't have to continue? Every head, eye, sensor, and thinking organ in the chamber turned toward the speaker. She was young by galactic standards, her species barely 1,000 years old in space. Humans, they called themselves. They came from a small blue world in what most beings considered the outer rim of nowhere important. The human who had spoken was their ambassador, Elena Vasquez. She was small compared to most beings in the chamber, with the soft pink skin and fragile-looking body that marked her species. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her brown eyes held something the ancient council members had forgotten they could feel: hope. Ambassador Vasquez, Executor Thane said, his voice carrying the patience of someone speaking to a child. Your species is new to the galaxy. You do not understand the depth of this conflict. The Zephyrians and Karathi have been fighting since before your son was born. Their hate runs deeper than the space between galaxies. I understand that everyone believes it can't be stopped, Elena said, standing up from her chair. She was so small that even standing, she barely reached the height of some beings who were sitting down. But believing something can't be done is often the only thing stopping it from being done. A sound like wind chimes filled with static came from the section where the crystalline hegemony sat. This was their version of laughter. Humans, said their speaker, a being that looked like a walking diamond. Always so confident, so sure they can solve what their betters cannot. We have tried everything, High Mother Vex said, her patterns shifting to show frustration. We have offered them territories. We have threatened them with our combined fleets. We have sent our wisest philosophers and our most skilled negotiators. Nothing works. They see each other as threats to the very nature of existence itself. Elena nodded slowly. That's exactly the problem. Everyone keeps trying to treat this like a normal territorial dispute or trade disagreement. But this isn't about land or resources, is it? This is about two peoples who believe the other shouldn't exist at all. Yes, Thane said, which is why it cannot be solved. Some conflicts are too deep for peace. Or maybe, Elena said, the solution isn't peace. Maybe it's something else entirely. The chamber fell silent. For the first time in centuries of discussing the war, someone had suggested there might be a third option besides victory, defeat, or endless fighting. What do you mean? Asked a being whose body was made of swirling clouds of colored gas. Elena looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes and sensors as she could. I'd like permission to study the conflict more closely, to talk to both sides, not to offer them peace, but to understand why they really fight. The ancient council members looked at each other. Some spoke in languages of light and radio waves too fast for translators to follow. Others simply stared at the small human who thought she could solve the galaxy's oldest problem. Finally, Executor Thane spoke. Very well, Ambassador. We grant you permission to study this war. But understand this. You are risking your life. Both sides kill anyone they suspect of helping their enemies. And when you fail, as you surely will, remember that we warned you. Elena smiled, and for a moment her small human face seemed to light up the entire chamber. Thank you. I won't let you down. As she left the chamber, many of the ancient beings shook their heads or made sounds of pity. They had seen so many try to end this war. All had failed. All had died or given up. This young human would be no different. They were wrong about one thing, though. Elena Vasquez would indeed be different, just not in the way any of them expected. Elena spent the next 3 months doing something no one had tried in over 50,000 years. She read everything, every report about the war, every peace treaty that had failed, every military analysis and cultural study. She read until her eyes hurt and her head pounded, but she kept reading. The more she learned, the more confused she became, not about the war itself, but about how everyone else saw it. Every report talked about the Zephyrians and Karathi, like they were completely different species who could never understand each other. Every peace plan tried to keep them apart, to give them separate spaces where they wouldn't have to meet. But Elena noticed something strange in the oldest records. Before the war started, the two peoples had actually traded with each other. They had even worked together on some projects. There were records of Zephyrian energy patterns being used to power Karathi crystal matrices. There were mentions of Karathi providing solid anchor points for Zephyrian research into energy manipulation. What happened? Elena asked herself as she sat in her small ship, drifting in neutral space between the war zones. What changed? She decided to find out by talking to the people who were actually fighting. This was dangerous. Both sides shot first and asked questions later when they found strangers in their territory. But Elena had an advantage. Her ship was small and weak-looking. It sent signals that clearly marked it as civilian and non-threatening. Most importantly, it carried the Council's diplomatic codes, which both sides still respected even if they ignored everything else the Council said. Her first stop was a Zephyrian energy garden, a place where beings of living lightning came to rest and feed on solar radiation. Elena's ship drifted toward the swirling patterns of light that marked the garden's edge. She sent a simple message. Human diplomat requests meeting to understand, not to judge. The response came as patterns of light that her ship's computer translated into words. Understanding is not possible. We are energy. They are matter. These things cannot mix without destruction. But they did mix once, Elena replied. Your own historical records show cooperation between your peoples. The light pattern stopped moving for a long moment. Then, you have read the old texts? The dead memories? Yes, I want to understand what changed. Come closer, small matter being. We will speak, but we will not touch. Touch brings only pain now. Elena guided her ship deeper into the energy garden. Around her, beings of pure electricity danced through space like living auroras. They were beautiful. but she could feel the sadness in their movements. When they finally spoke to her, she understood why. Long ago, we tried to share our nature with the Karathi, the Zephyrians told her. We thought if they could feel energy as we do, they would understand us better. We offered to show them how to let parts of their consciousness flow free from their crystal forms. What happened? Elena asked. They changed. For a brief time, some Karathi learned to exist as both energy and matter. They were more than either of us alone. But then, the light patterns became jagged with old pain. The fear came. Other Karathi said their changed brothers were no longer truly Karathi. They began to fight among themselves. The energy-touched Karathi were destroyed by their own people. Elena felt her heart sink. And then, we tried to save them. We fought the pure Karathi to protect the changed ones. But we failed. All the energy-touched Karathi died. And in fighting to save them, we had killed thousands of pure Karathi. From that moment, they have seen us only as destroyers of their kind. Elena thanked the Zephyrians and left their garden. Now she needed to hear the other side of the story. She traveled to the edge of Karathi space and sent the same message about wanting to understand. The Karathi response was immediate and harsh. There is nothing to understand. The light dancers seek to unmake us, to turn us into chaos like themselves. But Elena was persistent. She kept sending messages, sharing what the Zephyrians had told her about trying to help the changed Karathi. Eventually, curiosity won over anger, and the Karathi agreed to meet with her. Elena found herself on a massive Karathi ship that was more like a flying city. Everything was made of crystal and metal, all of it connected in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Karathi who spoke to her was part of their collective consciousness, a single voice speaking for billions of minds. The light dancers lie, the Karathi said through a crystal formation that rang like bells when it spoke. They did not try to help our changed brothers. They tried to steal them from us. Tell me what happened from your side, Elena said. The crystal rang with sounds of old grief. Some of our people began to change after contact with the energy beings. They started to become something new, something that was both Karathi and Zephyrian. At first, we were happy for them. They could do things neither pure Karathi nor pure Zephyrians could do. So what went wrong? They began to say that our pure forms were limited, that we needed to all change as they had changed. They said the old ways of thinking in crystal matrices were too slow, too rigid. They wanted to reshape our entire civilization. The crystals ringing became sharp and angry. When we refused, they tried to force the change on others. They began converting Karathi against their will. Elena felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. And when you tried to stop them, the energy beings defended them. They said we were trying to destroy evolution itself. They attacked our ships, our worlds. They killed thousands of us to protect dozens of the changed ones. The crystal's voice grew cold, so we destroyed all the changed ones to save ourselves. And we have been fighting ever since. Elena left Karathi space with a heavy heart, but also with hope. She finally understood what had really happened. The original cooperation had worked too well. The hybrid beings that resulted were more powerful than either parent species. But they had also threatened the identity of both groups. Fear had led to violence, and violence had led to 1,000,000 years of war. But Elena had seen something else in both stories. Both sides still remembered the hybrids with a mixture of fear and wonder. Both admitted that the combined beings had been more capable than either pure form. The fear wasn't really about destruction, it was about change. Elena spent the next month developing her theory. What if the war wasn't really about energy versus matter, or order versus chaos? What if it was about two species who were afraid to become something new? What if they were fighting because they both secretly wanted the same thing, but were too scared to admit it? She began reaching out to moderate voices on both sides. Not the military leaders or the political chiefs, but scientists and philosophers who remembered the old days of cooperation. She found Zephyrians who still studied the patterns of crystal growth. She found Karathi who experimented with energy fields in their private laboratories. Slowly, carefully, Elena began to plant an idea. What if they tried the cooperation again? But this time, what if they did it properly? What if they created volunteer programs where individuals from both species could choose to become hybrids? What if they learned from the past mistakes and built safeguards to protect both the changers and the unchanged? It was a radical idea. It would mean both species admitting that their current forms weren't perfect. It would mean risking the same disaster that had started the war in the first place. But Elena had one advantage that no previous peacemaker had possessed. She wasn't trying to keep the two species apart. She was trying to help them become something new together. And deep in their hearts, both the Zephyrians and Karathi remembered how wonderful that had felt, if only for a brief moment, 1,000,000 years ago. Elena's breakthrough came 6 months after she started her research, in a place where no one expected it. She was studying genetic records in the Council's vast archives when she found something that made her hands shake with excitement. Both the Zephyrians and Karathi had the same ancestral DNA patterns. It was buried deep in their biological histories, so old that both species had forgotten it. But the proof was there in the genetic code. Millions of years ago, before they had evolved into energy beings and crystal matrices, they had been the same species. They were cousins who had grown apart over time, not natural enemies destined to fight forever. Elena stared at the data for hours, checking and rechecking her findings. There was no mistake. The Zephyrians and Karathi were two halves of the same evolutionary path. One branch had learned to exist as pure energy, shedding physical form for the freedom of thought made manifest. The other had chosen to perfect physical form, building bodies of living crystal that could last forever. But they both came from the same root. They were family. Elena's hands trembled as she copied the data to her personal files. This changed everything. If both species shared the same ancestor, then the hybrid beings from long ago weren't unnatural monsters. They were evolutionary throwbacks returning to what their species had been before the Great Split. She sent encrypted messages to her contacts on both sides, the moderate scientists and philosophers who had been listening to her ideas. "I need to meet with you," she told them. "All of you. Together. I have something that will change how you see this war forever." The meeting took place in secret, on an abandoned space station in neutral territory. Elena had been working for months to build trust with these individuals, but she still held her breath as the first ships arrived. Would they actually come? Would ancient enemies sit in the same room just because a young human asked them to? They came. 3 Zephyrian researchers materialized as shimmering patterns of light in the station's conference room. 4 Karathi scientists connected their consciousness to crystal interfaces they had brought with them. For the first time in centuries, energy beings and matter beings were in the same space without weapons drawn. Elena stood at the center of the room, feeling the tension like electricity in the air. The Zephyrians' energy fields made her hair stand on end. The Karathi's crystalline matrices hummed with frequencies that made her bones ache. But they were here. They were listening. "Before I show you what I've found," Elena said, "I want each of you to tell me what you think the other side really is. Not what your governments say, but what you personally believe." The Zephyrians spoke first, their voices like wind through crystal chimes. "They are minds trapped in cages of their own making. Beautiful, complex cages, but still prisons. We believe they fear the freedom that energy offers." The Karathi response came as harmonized tones from their crystal interfaces. "They are thoughts without anchor, ideas without substance. We believe they fear the responsibility that comes with permanent form. They drift because they cannot commit to being anything specific." Elena nodded. "You're both right. And you're both wrong." She activated the holographic display in the center of the room. "Look at this." The genetic data appeared in the air between them, showing the deep structural similarities between both species. Elena watched their reactions carefully. The Zephyrians' light patterns flickered with surprise. The Karathi's crystal matrices rang with sounds of confusion. "This is impossible," one of the Karathi said. "We are fundamentally different forms of existence." "Your current forms are different," Elena agreed. "But your origins are the same. You're not natural enemies. You're siblings who chose different paths." She brought up more data, showing the evolutionary timeline. Your ancestor species faced a choice millions of years ago. They could evolve toward pure energy, gaining incredible freedom and flexibility, or they could evolve toward perfect matter, gaining stability and permanence. Most species have to choose one path or the other. "Most species?" asked a Zephyrian, its voice crackling with curiosity. Elena smiled. "But you don't have to choose. Because you're the same people underneath. The hybrid beings that started your war weren't abominations. They were your species remembering how to be whole." The room fell silent. Elena could feel the weight of 1,000,000 years of hatred pressing down on this moment. Everything depended on how these scientists reacted to learning their entire worldview was wrong. Finally, one of the Karathi spoke. If this is true, if we really are related, then the hybrid form would be natural, finished a Zephyrian. It would be a return to our original state, but enhanced by everything we've learned since the split. Exactly, Elena said, and I think we can make it work this time. We can learn from the mistakes of the past and create a controlled, voluntary process. Individuals who want to experience both forms of existence, while protecting the right of others to remain as they are. Over the next hour, Elena laid out her plan. Small groups of volunteers from both species would work together to recreate the hybrid form, but this time there would be safeguards. No forced conversions. No demands that entire civilizations change. Just a chance for those who wanted it to experience what their ancestors had been before the great evolutionary split. The scientists were fascinated. They began working out the technical details, figuring out how energy patterns could safely merge with crystal matrices. They discussed the social implications, the political challenges, the 1,000 details that would need to be resolved. Elena watched them work together and felt hope blooming in her chest. For the first time in a million years, Zephyrians and Karathi were cooperating instead of fighting. It was working, but she wasn't the only one watching. Unknown to Elena and her secret meeting, the hardline factions of both species had been monitoring their activities. Zephyrian war leaders tracked the energy signatures of their own scientists. Karathi military commanders traced the communication networks their researchers were using. And when they learned what Elena was proposing, they felt something worse than anger. They felt fear. The extremists on both sides had built their entire identities around the war. For them, the enemy wasn't just wrong, they were evil. The idea that Zephyrians and Karathi might actually be the same people underneath threatened everything they believed about themselves. Emergency. Meetings were held in the deepest command centers of both civilizations. War leaders who had spent lifetimes perfecting ways to kill each other suddenly found themselves in agreement about something. For the first time in centuries, the humans had to be stopped. But the extremists weren't the only ones. Watching Elena's activities, in the highest chambers of the Galactic Council, ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy for eons were growing concerned about something they hadn't expected. The young human was succeeding where everyone else had failed. Executor Thane studied the intelligence reports flowing in from the war zone. Energy beings and crystal minds working together. Secret meetings between enemy scientists. Most disturbing of all, preliminary tests that showed the hybrid form was not only possible but stable. She's actually going to end the war, High Mother Vex said, her patterns shifting to show confusion and alarm. The human is going to solve the unsolvable. Thane's Mercury form rippled with thought. Yes, and that presents us with a serious problem. The Council had ruled the galaxy for millions of years by being the wise elders who solved problems no one else could solve. Their authority came from their age, their experience, their accumulated wisdom. They were the ones younger species came to for guidance. But if a human barely 1,000 years old could solve the galaxy's oldest problem, what did that say about the value of ancient wisdom? What did that say about the Council's right to rule? If she succeeds, Vex continued, every species in the galaxy will ask why we couldn't do what she did. They'll question our leadership, our authority. Worse, Thane said, they'll realize that age and experience aren't always better than fresh thinking. The entire order of galactic civilization could be threatened. Then what do we do? Thane was quiet for a long moment, considering options that would have been unthinkable just months before. We ensure that she doesn't succeed, and we make sure that no one else tries what she tried. In the depths of the council chambers, plans began to form, plans that would solve the problem of Elena Vasquez permanently, while making sure the galaxy never forgot the consequences of challenging the established order. Elena, meanwhile, continued her work, unaware that she had made enemies far more dangerous than the warring species she was trying to help. She was so close to success that she could taste it. She had no idea that success itself had become her death sentence. Elena stood in the preparation chamber, adjusting her formal diplomatic robes for what she believed would be the most important presentation of her life. Today she would show the full Galactic Council the successful results of her work. 3 hybrid beings waited in containment fields nearby, living proof that the million-year war could end. The hybrids were beautiful, They existed as both energy and matter simultaneously. Their crystal bodies shot through with patterns of living light. When they spoke, their voices harmonized in ways that made Elena's heart sing. They were everything she had hoped they would be, the best of both species combined into something greater than either alone. "Are you ready?" she asked them, though she knew they could sense her emotions directly through their enhanced empathic abilities. "We are ready, Elena, friend," they replied in unison, their voices carrying the crystal clarity of Karathi thought and the flowing melody of Zephyrian consciousness. "Today we show the galaxy that hate can become love, that war can become cooperation." Elena smiled. After 8 months of secret work, hidden meetings, and careful experimentation, she had done it. She had solved the unsolvable. The hybrid beings were stable, happy, and more capable than anyone had imagined. They could manipulate both matter and energy with equal skill. They could think with the deep permanence of crystal and the quick flexibility of lightning. Best of all, their creation had required no force, no coercion. The volunteers from both species had chosen transformation freely, and their success was inspiring others. Underground networks in both civilizations were quietly spreading word of the achievement. Peace was finally possible. "Ambassador Vasquez," came a voice from the chamber's communication system. "The council is ready for your presentation." Elena took a deep breath and activated the transport fields around the hybrid beings' containers. Together, they moved through the crystal corridors of the council station toward the great chamber where representatives of the galaxy's eldest species waited. The chamber was packed. Word of Elena's requested presentation had spread, and beings from across the galaxy had come to see what the young human had discovered. Even some Zephyrian and Karathi observers were present, maintaining their ancient hatred even as they watched from opposite sides of the vast room. Elena walked to the center of the chamber with confidence. Around her, the hybrid beings materialized from their transport fields, their forms shimmering with combined energy and matter. Gasps echoed through the chamber as the assembled delegates saw them for the first time. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. "8 months ago you gave me permission to study the war between the Zephyrians and Karathi. You expected me to fail, as everyone before me had failed." She gestured to the hybrid beings beside her. "Instead, I have found the solution. These beings represent the end of the million-year war. They are proof that the Zephyrians and Karathi are not natural enemies, but two halves of the same evolutionary whole." The chamber erupted in sounds of amazement, confusion, and fear. Elena had expected this reaction. She raised her hand for silence and continued. "The war began because of a misunderstanding about change and identity. Both species feared losing themselves in transformation. But these hybrid beings show us that evolution doesn't destroy identity, it enhances it. They are more Zephyrian and more Karathi than either pure form, because they combine the best of both." Elena activated her data displays, showing the genetic evidence, the successful transformation process, and the psychological profiles of the hybrid beings. The evidence was overwhelming. The solution was real. But as she spoke, Elena began to notice something strange. The ancient council members weren't responding with joy or relief. Instead, their body language showed growing alarm. Executor Thane's Mercury form was rippling with agitation. High Mother Vex's patterns had shifted to colors Elena had never seen before. "This is indeed remarkable," Executor Thane said when Elena finished her presentation. "You have achieved something extraordinary, Ambassador. Something that will require careful consideration." "With respect, Executor," Elena replied, "there's nothing to consider. The war can end immediately. Both species' moderate factions are ready to begin voluntary transformation programs. We could have peace within a year." "Yes," High Mother Vex said, her voice carrying undertones Elena couldn't identify. "You could indeed have peace. But tell us, Ambassador, what makes you think that's what the galaxy needs?" Elena stared at the ancient being in confusion. "What do you mean? Of course, peace is what the galaxy needs. The war has killed billions and destroyed entire systems. The war," said Thane, "has also provided stability. It has given both species purpose and identity. It has created clear boundaries and predictable patterns of behavior. What you propose would upset the balance that has maintained galactic civilization for eons." Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. "Are you saying you want the war to continue?" "We are saying," Vex replied, That change must be carefully managed. Your success demonstrates remarkable innovation, but also remarkable danger. If other young species see that ancient problems can be solved so easily, they might begin to question other long-standing arrangements. Around the chamber, Elena noticed that security forces were quietly moving into position. The hybrid beings beside her sensed the shift in mood and began to glow more brightly as their defensive instincts activated. "You invited me to present my solution," Elena said, backing slightly toward the hybrid beings. "You said you wanted to end the war." "We said we would listen to your ideas," Thane corrected. "We never said we would implement them." Elena's mind raced as she realized what was happening. The council wasn't just rejecting her solution, they were afraid of it. Afraid of what it represented. If a young human could solve their oldest problem, what did that say about their wisdom, their authority, their right to rule? "The hybrid beings will be destroyed," Vex announced. "Their existence threatens the natural order of species development. As for you, Ambassador, you will be confined while we determine how to handle your overly creative approach to diplomacy." "No," Elena said firmly. The hybrid beings moved protectively around her, their combined energy fields creating a barrier of light and crystal. "These beings are people, not problems to be solved. They have the right to exist. They have the right to nothing," Thane replied. "They are abominations created by meddling and forces beyond your understanding." Elena looked around the chamber desperately. Some of the younger delegates looked uncomfortable with what was happening, but none spoke up. The ancient council members had made their decision and their word was law. "You're making a mistake," Elena said. "Ending this war peacefully will strengthen the galaxy, not weaken it." "Perhaps," Vex said. "But allowing young species to solve ancient problems will definitely weaken our authority. And that is unacceptable." The chamber began to fill with an ominous humming sound. Elena recognized it from her studies of ancient weapons. The council was powering up their station's defense systems, but pointing them inward instead of outward. Elena looked at the hybrid beings who had trusted her, who had volunteered to become living bridges between enemy species. They looked back at her with eyes that held both crystal clarity and energy fire, and she saw in them not just forgiveness, but pride. "We do not regret our choice, Elena, friend," they said in harmony. "You have shown the galaxy what is possible. That is enough." "It's not enough," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "You deserve to live. You deserve to be free." "We will live," they replied, "in the memory of what we proved, in the hope we created, in the change that will come even if we do not see it." The humming reached a crescendo. Around the chamber, beings who had lived for millions of years prepared to commit murder to protect their power. And in the center of it all, a young human woman realized that sometimes the greatest victories require the greatest sacrifices. Elena Vasquez looked up at the ancient beings who ruled the galaxy and spoke her final words to them. "You can kill us, but you can't kill what we've proven. Love is stronger than fear. Growth is stronger than stagnation, and truth is stronger than power." The light that filled the chamber next was brighter than any star. The news of Ambassador Elena Vasquez's death spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours, every communication network carried the same shocking report. The human diplomat and her hybrid companions had been killed by extremist terrorists during a peace presentation to the council. Executor Thane had crafted the story carefully. According to the official report, radical elements from both warring species had somehow infiltrated the council chambers and murdered Elena to prevent peace. The council expressed deep regret for the security failure and offered humanity their condolences for the loss of such a promising young diplomat. It should have worked. The story was believable, the evidence was carefully fabricated, and the council's authority remained unquestioned. Thane and the other ancient leaders expected the galaxy to mourn briefly, then return to accepting the war as an unchangeable fact of life. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The secret networks Elena had built over months of patient work lit up with fury. The moderate scientists and philosophers who had worked with her knew the truth about the hybrids. They had seen the successful transformations. They knew peace was possible, and they knew the council was lying. Dr. Zektar, a Zephyrian energy researcher who had helped design the transformation process, was the first to break silence. She broadcast her findings across every Zephyrian communication network. showing evidence of the successful hybrid program and the Council's deception. Within hours, Karathi scientist Prime Node Kathera did the same thing on her side, sharing recordings of conversations with Elena and proof that the hybrid beings had been stable and peaceful. But the most powerful revelation came from an unexpected source. The hybrid beings Elena had created hadn't been the only ones. Secret transformation experiments had been taking place in hidden laboratories across both civilizations, inspired by Elena's early successes. When news of her murder reached them, these underground hybrids emerged from hiding. They didn't come out to fight. They came out to mourn. The sight of energy crystal beings weeping for a murdered human diplomat shattered something fundamental in both civilizations. For 1,000,000 years, Zephyrians and Karathi had believed they were destined enemies. Now they watched their own transformed children grieving together for the same lost friend. Commander Velnara, leader of the largest Zephyrian battle fleet, was preparing for another strike against Karathi forces when the first reports reached her. She watched the recordings of hybrid beings singing funeral songs that blended Zephyrian energy harmonies with Karathi crystal resonances, and felt something break inside her chest. "Stand down," she ordered her fleet. "All ships stand down." Her second-in-command flickered with confusion. "Commander, our orders are to proceed with the attack on Karathi Sector 7. "I said stand down," Velnara repeated. "Look at those beings. Look at what they've become. Look at what we could have been." Her energy form pulsed with old pain. "The humans found our children, and the Council murdered them for it." Similar scenes played out across Karathi space. War leader Thexai watched his crystal matrices resonate with sympathy as hybrid voices called for an end to the cycle of violence. For the first time in his long life, he found himself agreeing with energy beings about something. "The Council has deceived us all," he announced to his assembled commanders. "The war was never necessary. We have been killing our own cousins for 1,000,000 years." Within days, something unprecedented began to happen. Zephyrian and Karathi fleets that had been moving toward battle instead turned toward neutral space. Not to fight, but to meet, to talk. To see if the hybrid beings' claims about shared ancestry could possibly be true. The first official meeting took place near the ruins of the Council station where Elena had died. Representatives from both species arrived expecting tension and suspicion. Instead, they found reflection and curiosity. "Show us your genetic records," the Karathi delegation requested. "Show us yours," the Zephyrians replied. When the data was compared, the truth Elena had discovered became undeniable. The same ancestral patterns, the same evolutionary roots, the same fundamental compatibility that had made the hybrid transformations possible. "We are the same people," whispered Commander Velnara, her energy form shimmering with wonder. "We always were," replied War Leader Thexai, his crystal matrix ringing with harmonics of recognition. The transformation that followed wasn't immediate or universal. Many on both sides still clung to old hatreds and ancient grievances. But for every pure-form being who rejected change, another stepped forward to volunteer for hybrid transformation. They called themselves the Vasquez Unity, honoring the human who had died to give them hope. The name spread across both civilizations as more and more individuals chose to become living bridges between the warring species. The process wasn't without difficulties. Some transformations failed. Some hybrid beings struggled with their dual nature. But for every setback, there were dozens of successes. Energy beings learned the joy of physical sensation through crystal matrices. Crystal minds experienced the freedom of pure thought through energy fields. And most importantly, they remembered. They remembered what their species had been before the Great Split. They remembered the cooperation Elena had documented in ancient records. They remembered that they were family. The war didn't end in a day. There were still skirmishes between die-hard extremists. There were still those who refused to accept the new reality. But the killing stopped having purpose. How could you hate someone you might be related to? How could you destroy someone who might choose to become your cousin? Within a year, the first joint Zephyrian Karathi colonies were established. Within 5 years, hybrid beings outnumbered pure forms in several sectors. Within a generation, the children of energy and crystal were exploring the galaxy together, combining their abilities to reach places and achieve things neither parent species could have managed alone. The Galactic Council watched these changes with growing alarm. Their carefully maintained order was crumbling. Other young species began questioning ancient edicts and traditional boundaries. If the Zephyrians and Karathi could evolve beyond their old forms, what other supposedly eternal truths might be changeable? "We have lost control," High Mother Vex admitted in emergency session. "No," Executor Thane replied, his mercury form rippling with something that might have been fear. "We have lost relevance." The Council tried to reassert their authority, issuing edicts against hybrid transformation and demanding a return to the old boundaries. But their words carried no weight. The hybrid beings were demonstrably superior to either pure form in almost every measurable way. They were stronger, smarter, more creative, and happier than their ancestors. More importantly, they remembered Elena Vasquez. Every hybrid child learned her story as their first lesson. They learned about the human diplomat who had seen through 1,000,000 years of hatred to the love underneath. They learned about her sacrifice and her vision. They learned that sometimes one person's courage could change the fate of civilizations. The war that had defined galactic politics for eons became ancient history within Elena's lifetime. The council that had ruled through age and tradition found itself replaced by representatives chosen for wisdom and innovation rather than longevity. The galaxy that had been divided by ancient boundaries began to explore new possibilities for cooperation and growth. Elena Vasquez never lived to see the peace she had created, but her name became something more than memory. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that no problem was too old to be solved, no hatred too deep to be healed, and no authority too ancient to be questioned. In the end, the Galaxy Council had been right about one thing. Elena's success did threaten the established order. It destroyed the idea that age automatically conferred wisdom, that tradition was always better than innovation, and that some conflicts were simply too complex for simple solutions. But they had been wrong about what would replace the old order. Instead of chaos, there was growth. Instead of conflict, there was curiosity. Instead of fear of change, there was excitement about possibility. The galaxy Elena's sacrifice helped create was younger, bolder, and more hopeful than the one she had found. And in the hybrid cities where energy beings danced with crystal minds, in the joint research stations where impossible problems found elegant solutions, in the children who grew up thinking cooperation was normal and hatred was strange, her memory lived on. The 1,000,000-year war was over. The age of unity had begun. And somewhere in the quantum fields where consciousness touched eternity, Elena Vasquez smiled.